the predominantly spoken. But within that Setswana, there are so many dialects. You go to Zeerust, they have a different dialect. You go to Rustenburg, they have a different dialect. You go to Mafikeng, which is now Mahikeng, they have a different dialect. And then we also have got a different Setswana dialect spoken in the Northern Cape, in Kimberley. Then there are other languages like Xhosa, isiZulu, Swati. You find in the townships. What we have to note is that the languages spoken in the urban areas differ considerably from their rural versions. These supposedly pure languages are found to bear only a loose family resemblance to the way modern people in the urban areas actually speak. So now, as academics and educators, we have to accept the dichotomy separating rural-based dialects from their urban varieties. So there's a distinction. Then the critical mistake that Muller points out here is that mother tongue education is the assumption that all schools in the same area are in the same situation, which is different. If you look at schools in the urban areas and schools in the rural areas, there is a difference. Sitate and Akla also point out that schools in rural areas have relatively homogeneous language settings, whereas urban schools have diverse and very fluid landscapes. Now we look at the multilingualism in the classrooms. Situating communicative interactions in space and the time accommodate diversity. We have to take note that when we look at multilingualism, we are looking at a situation whereby now we're looking at language in terms of space. Okay, that space, which is a small space in, which is a classroom, but then that classroom is part of a wider space, which is a township, then an urban area. So whatever happens in the classrooms in terms of language, it's so unpredictable because remember, these students, these learners are exposed to different languages in their communities. So what we challenge now are classrooms that are structured around the dictates of monoglossic language ideology, whereby we assume that there is monolingualism in the classroom. We have to challenge again the perception that any variation from a standard language is a deficiency. It's not a deficiency, but we have to consider that as a linguistic variety. Well, I gave you some examples from Makona. I don't want to just, because I think I've already touched that. I'll have to rush to the next slide. But when we talk of spatial repertoires, we draw on the linguistic concept of spatial repertoires from the ideas of Pennycook, Kanak, Raj. Here I conceptualize township linguistic dialects from a spatial angle. I have to acknowledge the input that I have been given by a fellow academic, Lara Cross. After reading my article on where I proposed recognition of Lokshin Lingua. Lokshin means just township. She wrote to me and said, well, she also has done work in the same area. So in her work, Laura reminds us that fixing township language as a standard variety goes against what it is. That is a highly flexible and dynamic way of speaking. So what she tells us here is, what she reminds us is that language is dynamic. So saying that when we use a standardized version, we are trying to fix something that is dynamic. So it calls questions. What happens if we refuse to fix those language practices as a language or a variety, and the conceptual implication that brings with it? Are we deviating from the norm, or are we coming up with our own new pedagogy? So she calls for an attempt to reconceptualize what language classrooms would look like if we dissolve the construct of a fixed first language that needs to be standardized, but take the heterogeneity and fluidity of township languaging seriously instead. So there's fluidity in township languaging. Remember, we're looking at a place where there is high migration, people coming in and out. And those people coming in have got their own languages. Another academic, Simtembile Tlogetwana, calls for the language body, that is the regulator, the PANSAL, to play an active role in foregrounding the utilization of African languages in classrooms. So now, if you look at Tlogetwana, Cross, and myself, we seem to touch on the same issue, but from different angles. The same issue of how to approach multilingualism in classrooms. Now within that multilingualism in the classrooms is the issue of the underlying problem of mother tongue education. This problem dates back to the apartheid policy, which was which was meant to preserve ethnic identities, the issue of Bantustans. And then this attempt was to create a monolingual society out of multilingual South Africa. So as you can see, that's where our problems emanate from, where we think that, well, we have to create one standard language because if we say it's a standard language, so we are trying to say, okay, there has to be monolingualism. But in reality, those classrooms are multilingual, they are not monolingual. An example, typically, Black people in urban areas are known to use 3 or more languages. That is as de Klerk and Slabbert and Finlayson point out. A typical classroom has 50 learners who speak 12 different mother tongues between them, especially in Gauteng. Those of you who have never taught in public schools, that's the reality. That's what is happening. I wonder how they are coping now with the present situation. It is likely that the child's home language will be one or more of those local regional dialects or sociolects or non-standard variety different from the written standard. So whatever is maybe used in the classroom could be maybe one or none of the dialects that the children are exposed to in their environments. So children from such multilingual settings are disadvantaged linguistically, both at home and at school. So you find that from the study that I carried out, I discovered that many of these children come from multilingual settings, where you find that maybe the father is maybe Pedi speaking, the mother is Zulu speaking, the child plays with children who are Tswana speaking. So there's a concoction of languages that the child is exposed to. Then when it comes to education, you find that even some of the educators who teach these children have got a low mastery of the so-called standard languages, and even in the 2 major official languages that is English and Afrikaans. So which means that these children are so disadvantaged. So what do I suggest? What do other academics suggest? They suggest that children need to be taught in languages they speak and understand. But then now, here is a problem. What language do they speak? So in the study that I carried out, one of the participants, that is one educator, said, you know what, these children they do not speak Setswana, and I don't know what they speak. So one of the parents, who happened to be an SGB chairperson, said in the interview, it was so interesting, he said, if educators say our children they don't know what our children speak. What is it that, because our children speak something, otherwise they wouldn't communicate. So they should communicate in that, teachers should communicate in the language that the children speak, either at home. So now we have to venture into conceptualizing township linguistic dialects from a spatial angle to say, okay, this is a dialect. By the way, even standard languages are dialects. This is not something that is new. Even if you go to England, you find different dialects, different versions of English. So my call is, let's try to address these linguistic dialects from a spatial angle, from a geographic angle. Recently, challenging the structural paradigm, scholars are becoming more sensitive to space as a more expansive framework for explaining communicative and social life. So that's what many scholars are doing now. So at the bottom there, I've given you examples of some scholars who have adopted that. Pennycook, Blomert, Shohami, and Curtailed. So all these approaches that these scholars are adopting have got a spatial orientation. So these are just a few lessons that I cited in my study, Mother Tongue Education in a Multilingual Township, Possibilities for Recognizing Blockchain Lingua in South Africa. What triggered off, or what started this debate that I presented in the article, where the protests that had been happening in the universities, where students were demanding, among other things, mother tongue education. So although the students had a point, they provoked a discussion on this issue. Mother tongue education is considered a fundamental right, yes. But then now we're looking at mother tongue education within a multilingual space. So how do we implement it? So within that approach of mother tongue education, children are taught in their supposed to be taught in their mother tongue for the first 3 years. And they switch to English in grade 4 as their main language of learning and teaching. So hence, you can see that the reason why I placed I underlined or highlighted that is in principle, but that is not what is happening in most classrooms. The proponents of mother tongue education suggest teaching in the language that children speak at home. Now we come to the problem. Now, when children go to school and they are presented with a standard language in a multilingual classroom, is that what they speak at home? That's the question. Okay. Right. In presenting my conclusions here, I do not suggest any solutions, but I present questions whereby, as academics, we ought to carry out some introspection, some research in this area. So what I've illustrated are the challenges of translating theory into practice. In this instance, capitalism on children's first or home language as the language of instruction in a multilingual, multi-dialect community. The language in education policy seems to fail to address the complex situation where schools teach in a language that is nonetheless different from what learners speak at home. Given the South African context, the concept of mother tongue is increasingly becoming ambiguous and flawed, considering the rural-urban migration and the changing landscape. So in this instance, I'm referring to the multilingual landscape of the urban areas. Arguably, township lingua is part of a township identity. It is lingua of cognition in which learners interact and form concepts for self-expression, facilitating learning. I make a pedagogical case for the recognition of township lingua as a standard language at a different space and time, we ought to calling for a design of models that can adapt to multilingual nature of township lingua. So I challenge the deficit language approach, whereby we think that learners who do not speak standard languages have got a deficiency. But we have to consider that whatever language they speak should be considered as a variety, not a deficiency. Thank you so much for listening to my talk.
Wow.
We clap.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sibanda, for your brilliant presentation. In fact, I got a few sentences I would like to read back to the colleagues. I'm getting the word for the first time, multilingual, the possibility of recognizing it in South Africa. Language is dynamic. When we use a standardized version, we are trying to fix what is dynamic. I think that is a bit powerful. There is a concoction of languages learners are exposed to. So at this point, I will just leave the floor open for questions. There's an icon on Zoom that you can use to raise up your hand if you have a question. Dr. Sibanda is here to answer your questions. Hello.
Hello,
people. Let's talk as Kulume.
Okay.
Time for questions. Please, can you ask questions?
Okay. Where do I find the hand thing? Must I just talk?
Yes, you can just talk.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rockie. That was just fascinating. I'm sorry I got there late. I was having a bit of a technical hitch.
No, it's fine. I also had a glitch.
I didn't. I was about to give up, and I was just going to watch the video, but I'm really glad I got in. I thought that was just really fascinating. Know what you've published, so I can read it.
Okay.
If have you written? Are there like articles where you've written?
Yes, the article there is the one in italics.
Okay.
Right at the top there, mother tongue education in a multilingual township.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
It for recognizing lingua in South Africa.
Okay. And I was just thinking that your focus on space. I've been reading an absolutely fascinating book about sort of language, space, and place and belonging.
Yes.
I can't think of the name right now, but I can send it to you if you would.
Okay, I'd appreciate that.
It's just one. Actually, it's actually one of the best academic books I've read in years. You know, and it's about all the stuff you're talking about. It's not really. It's not set locally, but it's migration and space, place, power. All that stuff. So I think it would probably resonate with what you're saying.
Okay, with what I'm interested in, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Also to ask Rockie, I sort of came in just as you were talking about migration. I mean, generally with rural, because I'm doing a whole lot of research at the moment on students' language and identity, and it's kind of work that's been going on for about 15 years. And generally with students from rural areas, would you say often those communities are monolingual in rural, kind of in rural communities?
They are, okay, can I come in there?
Please.
Okay, they are not monolingual in the sense that maybe you are putting it, because within you find that within the same maybe area, within the same province, there are so many dialects that are spoken.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So there may just be, there's more likely to be one language that dominates, but many varieties of that language.
Yes, there are many varieties of that language.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other question? Mariani, can I come in?
Had a hand up.
Oh,
Okay, please.
thank you so much for the presentation. I think it was a lovely presentation. I don't know if you can see my face. This is my
I
first
can
time.
see Mulebukeng.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
I'm doing a research that's mostly based on the restandardization of dialects, especially dialects that are in different areas. And I have a question though. Do you think that it's possible that we're going to standardize each and every dialect that's in within each and every language? For instance, in Northern Sotho, we have like almost 18 dialects. Do you think that it's going to be possible? The resources, do you think there are going to be enough resources for us to standardize all those dialects, or how can we go about including them into the standard form?
Okay, what the question that you asking is something that came up sometime when I was doing my when I was doing some my research. So with the standardization, yes, it can happen. That is provided the government is committed. There is someone, I'm forgetting who wrote, there's a piece that the person wrote, whereby the academic was arguing that there is very little commitment on the part of government when it comes to promoting the languages. Look, for instance, Africans developed from a language that was never spoken before, but because the previous government was so committed to advancing Afrikaans, so we look at it was elevated to. So it can be done with much commitment. Much commitment, not from only, but even from academics, you and I, if we committed, although it might take time. It might take time because the other problem that we have is the attitude that people have to African
languages. Yes. Because I also think that we should create more awareness to other students about studying languages, because back in high school, honestly, I didn't know that linguistics existed as a subject. So I studied in a government school in the rurals, and I didn't know much. When I came to university, I had those linguistics. I was like, what's that? I didn't even know what linguistic is. So I think creating awareness will also help in improving languages, developing languages more.
In the study that I carried out, that forms the basis of the article. One of the things that came up was that even the people who spoke these pure standard languages changed when they came to urban areas. There were issues where people spoke this, would try to fit in with the urban lingua or the township lingua, because they were called names like Boma Fiki Solo, the new arrivals. And then once that it was a stigma, it is a stigma that is attached to speaking a standard language.
Okay, I cannot see the hand. Can I say something?
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much for the very informative presentation.
Thank you so much.
I liked the way you problematized the mother tongue itself.
Yes.
Yeah. For me, when you talked about 25 different languages in Johannesburg as the epicenter of multilingualism, I also added more than 100 languages, because I imagined the immigrants in that space who are also adding their own languages, which makes yes, which makes the society more linguistically complex.
Yes.
So it gave me an insight into what is new, or what is the new normal about language. It also defined the kind of practice that you are talking about. It also gave me that the impression that the everyday practice of languaging defies that standardization that you are talking about, that that monolingualism that is within the people's minds. It also what can I say? It gives that the thinking, that perception of languages as bounded entities is obsolete. It doesn't exist to me. The new normal is that languages are fluid and porous, and languages, they don't have boundaries. People can speak as many languages as possible. So in my own thinking, I'm thinking at looking language as within the speaker, not outside the speaker. What the person has in terms of language, not what people think about language. Because if we look at language in terms of Ndebele, Zulu, this and that, this is not the exact thing that is happening on the ground. People, the linguistic 21st linguistic environment or linguistic climate gives us the picture that the mother tongue is problematized, does not exist in a certain way, if little to say. I don't know with others.
Yes, I do understand you. I understand you. Yes, it is a problem, really. It is a problem because now we tend to ask ourselves, what really is mother tongue? Is it?
Yes.
Are we talking about home language? Are we talking about the language that is spoken by the mother, or are we talking about the language that the child speaks? So it becomes a problem in that instance. Because now for you to find someone who speaks a purely standard language in an urban setting, it is rare.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I say something? I can't find a section where I raise my hand. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Sibanda,
Yes.
And I want to agree with you that the concept of multilingualism is quite attractive, particularly given the South African context. We're talking about transformation, we're talking about being inclusive. And if we are to be inclusive, it's important that we use the language that the learner can understand, not the language that we, the old school, assume that the learner should understand. I'm involved with a training program at Wits University that deals with targeting talent, and we bring together learners throughout South Africa, the best of the best, to teach them science, but also to engage with them around issues of diversity. So we use a lot of Sizulu and Sisuthu and English in our discussion. And I'm finding that even when you use Zulu, for example, to help them to reflect on life skill issues, like when you ask them, what is, for example, a private part means, like a vagina, a breast, when they talk about it in English, for example, they find it much better to relate. But when you use the African language, it's like, wow, that's a swear word. So you can see that it's important then for us to be flexible in terms of the words and language we use, so that we can even enhance the learning process. So
So Okay, Jackie. I see Jackie. Oh, yeah. Okay, Jackie.
Is it my turn?
Yes, I saw you.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation. And I just want to say that I'm happy to see my fellow vetsies on the webinar. Hi, Belinda, Dr. Leketi, Mariani, and everybody else. It's good to see you. The presentation is quite interesting for me, and what is the key takeaway for me is the issue of translating theory into practice. And I'm sure, one of the ways we can do this is the gospel of Dr. Leketi Makalela's translanguaging. But, I just think that one of the issues that needs to be addressed is, dealing with teacher beliefs or student-teacher, at least maybe at student-teacher level, about language teaching, about languages, about how important South African or African languages are in making education accessible to children across the the curriculum. Because there's a site on Facebook, South African Teachers, and when you try to talk to them about teaching using children's languages, the languages that children teach, whether it's Township, Lingua, or anything to help make content accessible, or translanguaging or code switching, as it was before popular, and people just bite your head off. Like, what are you gonna do with home languages? English is an international language. You even look at you writing in English, and you don't want children to have access. So the whole thing about teacher beliefs and ideologies, I think maybe people get it. We get it. We start learning about it and changing our attitudes at postgraduate level, which may be too late to influence how teachers use language in the classroom, and also embrace the languages that children speak, at home. From my experience at VETS at undergraduate level, I was taught, the way I was taught to teach language, translanguaging was mentioned, code switching was mentioned, but the curriculum is tailored in a way that supports the current status quo of the early exit transition, rather than using languaging from different languaging, multilingualism in the classroom, translanguaging from the get-go. You can teach English, children can still get to be able to grasp English, but we need to change our attitudes in how we look at our languages and how we can actually use them in the classroom to enhance learning. So thank you. And I think that point of translating theory into practice is a critical one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Although you did not acknowledge me as well, a FETS alumni as well.
Oh, sorry. I don't know if you're Dr. Sibanda. I don't remember meeting you. I'm so sorry. But
I'm also a FETS alumni.
I'm so sorry.
I got both my honors and masters from FETS.
Very pleased to meet you. Very pleased to meet you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that input. What we ought to do, what we ought to remember is that when you talk of these, whether it's a township lingua is not tsotsitaal, it's not slang. It's different from slang. But it's a variety of language, of a language that is spoken. For instance, if you go to Pretoria, there is what they call Pretoria Setswana. Setswana Sako Pitori. And then when you go to, let's say, the townships in Soweto, by the way, what I found fascinating is that most of the international or foreign academics think that when you talk of a township, we're talking of Soweto only. They don't know that townships are there all over South Africa. For instance, my studies were not best at Soweto. I did them in the West Rand. I didn't do them in Soweto. So they think that, well, Soweto is are the only townships. Okay, now, given an example of Soweto, if you go to Soweto, you find that maybe Dobsonville maybe will be dominated by maybe Sotho-speaking people. If you go maybe to Dube, you find that maybe it's Zulu-speaking people. So there are different varieties of those languages, which are different, which deviate from the standard varieties that that people speak in the rural settings. So the point that you're raising is that we should encourage our children to speak, whether it's the standard variety or the variety that is that they adopt in the urban areas. We should encourage our children to speak those languages and use them to, because those are the languages that they speak in the township, and they use them for conceptualizing facts. But now, just imagine, for instance, I'm multilingual. I speak almost all the South African languages and other languages in other countries. We ask children to conceptualize ideas, but then now this person is thinking in another language, and has got to conceptualize that in a different language, so which is a bit difficult. That's why, as educators, as academics, we should not shy away from students using their own languages. I teach students who speak different languages, even from other African countries. You find a student might say, okay, I think I can say this better in my language. Say, okay, say it. Then I'll ask, is there anyone who can translate to others? You find there is one or two who can translate. So that's what we should encourage in our field.
Thank you.
Can I talk?
Yes, Matariro.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I've been struggling to talk. Yeah. Sorry.
Carry on. We're gonna take one more question.
Okay, mine is not a question as such. I just want to add to what Molebogeng raised at the beginning about the issue of standardization. So the issue of language standardizations and their use in the classroom is very political. I think there are lots of issues of power, and so you cannot separate language and power. So standardization is possible, no matter how many dialects can be spoken. I'm a Zimbabwean, and there are so many Shona dialects that we have in Zimbabwe, but we have one standard Shona that is acceptable for the orthography that is acceptable is from one Shona dialect. So besides the issue of commitment to standardize certain dialects, there is also issues of power. For example, the Shona dialect that is standardized in Zimbabwe is actually the Shona that was spoken by Robert Mugabe. So he was in power. Yeah, yeah, so he was in power, and the dialect that was then standardized is the one that was his. So issues of language standardization can happen. There's no difficulty in choosing a certain dialect as a standard, but also there are issues of power struggles within that can actually cause problems on the decision on which language to decide, on which dialect to decide to make the standard one. So yeah, language and power relations cannot be separated. So there's a lot of politics involved, but it's possible to standardize one dialect, even if you have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you want me to respond to that?
No, it was a comment.
Oh,
but
it was
you can talk about it.
Yes. As you mentioned, that standardization has got an element of political power. It is possible, but it has got several disadvantages. For instance, the example that you gave, whereby whoever is in power will try to promote his or her own language. What about then other people who speak other Shona dialects, like maybe the Karanga, the Ndau, the Manyika? Okay, the same applies to maybe a good example is Malawi, whereby Chichewa has been promoted throughout the years. Yet there are other languages that are there in Malawi, which were suppressed. Look at our neighbor also, Botswana. in Botswana, you find that there are other languages that are not even recognized, but those languages are spoken. Even the Setswana that is recognized there it has got it's a dialect, which happen to be the dialect of the people who speak that language, who are in power. Other languages are not recognized.
Okay, thank
So
you.
it is possible.
Professor
It is possible,
Makalela
but
has
with
his hand up.
disadvantages.
Professor Makalela, is your hand up? Prof.
I can't see him, he has disappeared.
Okay, so Dr. Monerang has a question. Doc? Yeah, because I have indications from the top.
Now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I can see him.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sibanda, for the excellent presentation that you made.
Thanks, Prof.
Quite captivating. We agree with you, some of us, that the notion of mother tongue education is problematic, and it had never been within the realities of languages spoken here. And Jackie from the US, thank you for joining us. But also the point that you make about the teacher belief and the understanding that you only have one language. You being in the United States, I hope that the only language you have in there is English, correct? So,
sorry, I'm back in South Africa for a while, Prof.
I see Soweto behind you. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, but your experience in the US still matters, right? About the whole monolingual idea. I think the same view, I mean, there was an expression here about rural areas. As far as I'm concerned, there's no rural area in South Africa that is monolingual.
Yes.
And then I wanted Dr. Sibanda to explain a little bit more on the special repertoire, especially realizing that the idea of dialects, because I think at the end of your conversation, of your presentation, you speak about standardizing the lingua franca, the township lingua.
Okay,
So in other words, the idea of a repertoire simply means an assemblage, a number of varieties coming there. But then when you talk about, we don't like the standardization of a language, but the lingua, once it's standardized, isn't that at odds with the idea of a repertoire? Should it be standardized, the lingua? That's the question.
Okay. Right, the last point that I made was a recognition of a township lingua. So as a dialect. So in that standardization, consideration has to be made to say, okay, here is another dialect which we have to include in this repertoire. Okay. I'm not calling for the standardization of the lingua itself, but the recognition of the lingua within that standardization.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I'm calling for, to say, okay, here is a lingua, it's a variety. So within that standardization, consideration has to be made, but not to standardize the lingua itself, but to recognize it as a variety.
Can I come in?
Yes.
I had wanted to make a point.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure if I'm audible enough. Thank you very much, Dr. Sibanda, for the presentation. It is quite an eye-opener. It's something that has been done in the past, advocating for the recognition of the other languages or other varieties. What is quite intriguing is when one imagines the concept of intelligibility, particularly on the written part. I take from the point that Marianne has made that language and power are basically inseparable, and language perpetuates ideologies and power. It would have been interesting to hear from you to your explanation on how we will include that on a written form, include those varieties in the written form. Remember that the power of education, the power of communication, it's stronger on a written piece. How would you accommodate those variety within written form? I know that written form has to do with standardization, which is politically inclined, but it would be very interesting for you to trend around those ideas that I've just raised.
Okay, when it comes to the written forms of a language, there's always been problems. For instance, if I can give you an example of Sesotho, the Sesotho spoken in Free State and the Sesotho spoken in Lesotho. Yes, you might find some resemblance in the spoken part of it, but then when it comes to the written, there are differences. For instance, where an L is pronounced as an L there, in Lesotho they pronounce it as a D. You find Dineo as Li and Neo. Whereas in the Free State, it will be D. So there is a problem there. It's not something new, or it's not something unique when it comes to African languages. Even in other languages, it is there. What I'm calling for is we have to accept that, okay, in this region or in this area, this is how people articulate, or this is how maybe this is the accepted spelling, or this is the accepted pronunciation.
All right, I do pick up the point that you're raising. You know, I'm a bit pragmatic because in the sense that we have been talking about these matters and other language-related matters for a long time. I had hoped that now it's a time for us to talk about strategy, strategy on how to infiltrate the power, to infiltrate the area of power. And for me, the area of power at the moment is issues related to standardization. And standardization is related to monoglossic approach and basically controlling almost everything. I had hoped that maybe we could talk about how do we do this? How do we make sure that these varieties are playing a role in a written form? I know it's going to be very difficult, but I thought that we need to strategize around that power. If we do not give them the power in that area, they will remain peripheral. They will always be used when it comes to a problem of classroom interaction. And sometimes the formality and the officialdom will kick them out of the center and place them in the periphery. Remember, when you sit down and respond in a written form with regard to your assignments, your tests, you're coming back and writing, the final product will not be incorporating in the visible sense the variety, the influence of the varieties that we're talking about. So it will influence that at the background. The key point is for us to foreground, taking from the background and making it the fore. So that's what I think we as the world and South Africa and the world are busy and need to work on. I know I'm ruffling feathers, but I think we need to push around that and see how we can debate that.
Okay, thank you so much for that insight. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. But then my concern from where I'm coming from with this argument is, in as much as we call for standardization, but let's be careful. Let's not suppress other dialects. Let's not pretend that there are certain dialects that are non-existent, because as I think it was Matariro who indicated that when it comes to these issues, we cannot separate them from politics. Whoever is in power, in most cases, you find that, well, that person or those people, that group of people, will try to advance their own language and make it a standard. Whereas in the process, other languages are overlooked or other dialects are overlooked, which is what I'm against. I'm saying that even this township lingua, it should be considered as a dialect. It should be considered as a variety of a certain language.
Thank you, Dr. Sibanda. I'm sorry to interrupt. You know, Zoom gives us a certain time limit and we're running out of time. So for the audience, I think you can hook up with Dr. Sibanda by email or social media for further conversation. We're gonna be having him, he's gonna be coming back to HuMEL to give another talk. Yeah, so at this moment, I will call on Celeste for a closing remark.
Thank
you. Celeste, are you there?
Thank you. Yes, I am here. Okay, thank you to everyone who attended this webinar. I am sure that everyone can agree with me when we say that it was very robust and we have learned a lot through this session. So I also want to thank Mrs. Doris Ngo, who is our chairperson today. Thank you for leading us into having a smooth and successful session. And to everyone who has attended, our speaker, Dr. Rockie Sibanda, thank you so much for your insight and your rich knowledge on languages and how your suggestions basically on how we can progress. After this, I have a lot of questions also that I wanted to ask, but then time is not on our side. So be advised that we will be hosting our Speaking in Tongues webinars on a monthly basis going forward. So my team and I will be sending out email invites just to tell you when they are happening, and we would really love for you to come back and participate so that we can learn from each other and develop as academics and also just enrich our organization as HuMEL. So do know that you can follow us on our social media platforms to see our work. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. On Twitter, we are at @vert_HuMEL. Facebook, @VertHuMEL. YouTube, we are HuMEL. So if you want to see anything that we are working on currently, how we are dealing with this whole pandemic, we are very innovative in that sense. So you can just go onto our social media and see all of that. Thank you again for everyone for taking their time to participate in our webinar. I would like to hand over to Ms. Doris.
Okay, so Sianda, I'm gonna close the session. Once more, thank you, Dr. Sibanda, for your brilliant presentation. Thank you, everybody, for taking out time to attend this seminar. We're looking forward to having you in our next presentation. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe. Yeah.